Chromatic Counsel, the podcast where law, leadership, and color come together. I'm your host, Kerry Heaps, and each week I sit down with attorneys and experts to explore the right presence, communication, and even wardrobe choices, including color, how that can help you stand out, inspire confidence, and make a lasting impression in the courtroom and beyond. A few quick announcements before we dive into today's show. If you are needing technology credits, CLE credits here in Florida, you are welcome to check out the Bodies Don't Lie Digital Tells version to reading body language on Zoom. So it's 1.5 tech credit for Florida. If you are in another state joining us, and your state does allow for you to apply for credit with a CLE that's accredited in another state, feel free to reach out to us directly so we can get all of the additional timestamps to you so you can get accreditation in your state. So today I have a great show lined up for you. And today on the show, I am joined by Emanuel Galimidi. He is the founding partner of Galimidi Law. After nearly 20 years representing some of the world's largest corporations, he made the bold decision to use his expertise to help those who need it most, the injured and their families. Now, before launching his own firm, he was a shareholder and head of the product liability practice group at one of the fastest growing defense firms in the country, litigating high stakes cases involving catastrophic injuries. Sorry, I haven't had enough coffee today. Wrongful death and class action suits. So, Emmanuel, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Absolutely. We're excited to dive into this conversation. I know as I was kind of doing a little bit of research and looking at your website, you spent a long time, defending large corporations, insurance companies, before you launched your own personal injury firm. And I just have to ask, what drove that shift? Because that's a pretty big change.
It is most attorneys who switch, if you will, from defense to plaintiff's work do it, within maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years out. They get some experience and then they switch over to doing plaintiff's work. I obviously waited a lot longer than that.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess to put it in a word, resentment is probably the one that I would use as to why I switched, but not so much resenting clients or what I was doing, because I had great clients, I had an amazing team, um, everything was great, but part of me for a little while was feeling like I should do something different, like I should um, try and go on a different adventure, if you will. And what could I do that would give me that fulfillment? And quite frankly, it was representing people that really needed it, that really needed this level of expertise and the abilities that I could bring to helping those that have been harmed by you know negligence of others and some other situations like that.
Mhm. And so you transitioned, you were doing product liability,
Mhm.
defense litigation, and you represented injured individuals. When you did this whole transition, there had to have been like a mindset shift. You had to have got, I mean, I'm not just like for a workflow shift, but also like in your mind, like what was happening there when you had to do kind of a mindset shift and how difficult was that?
Sure. So it was challenging when I started to first think it through, and it took me about a year to plan it in my mind and kind of put some things in place that I needed to have to then launch the firm. But I would say that the two biggest changes were one, as a defense lawyer, you're typically, not always, but you're typically reacting to what's happening
Mhm.
and trying to kind of cut people off, if you will, at the pass in order to protect your client's interests. On the plaintiff side, it's the exact opposite. You are actually prosecuting the case. You are kind of launching the attacks, if you will. So that's a bit of a mindset shift. One that was a little bit easier, I would say, than the next one, which was keeping in mind who the client is. When you're dealing with a CEO or a CFO or a chief legal officer or what have you, their expectations and their understanding of what's happening is entirely different from someone who's never been, in a car accident or someone who's never, had, a traumatic loss to a loved one. That's a totally different landscape emotionally that you're dealing with, that is different from the defense world.
Hmm. And when you decided to start your own firm, what were the top three strategic moves that you had to make to kind of set yourself apart? Because you're in Miami, which is obviously a really crowded market. I'm here in Florida too, but I'm up, in the Panhandle area.
Sure.
What were some of the strategic moves that you had to make to kind of really set yourself apart from everybody else?
So I would say, the first one was a lot. Social media is obviously very important, and that's part of the, one of the marketing branches that we use. But for me, it was leaning into all of the relationships that I had built over time, so that it wasn't so much as much as it was starting from zero, it
Mhm.
wasn't in terms of relationships.
Yeah.
And to really begin to foster those and to harvest a lot of that goodwill, so to speak, that I had built up over the years with different attorneys in different practice areas to now, assist in this transition. And then the other one I would say, and I would say this to any business owner who's starting, is I kept my overhead as low as conceivably possible, which, in a post-COVID world is much easier to do
Yeah.
than 5 years ago, let's say, where you had to have a bunch of different things in place, brick and mortar style, let's say, right away, or you didn't have a practice or a business, what have you. Now I've kind of graduated into all of that, but initially that for me was important because it freed up a lot of capital to put into marketing because I wasn't busy, I wasn't worried, I should say, about paying a lot of other, overhead infrastructure pieces that would have, diminished that ability.
Hmm. And you touched on social media, and I have to ask because I find with attorneys, you either have attorneys that are really focused on that, like they're just diehard social media people, like they're constantly doing TikTok videos and Instagram reels, and like you touched on something important about building relationships. And do you feel like you said, in this post-COVID world, do you feel like social media is playing a heavy part in the legal industry for you to get, not just you, but any attorney to get clients?
It is, I think it is playing a big role,
Mhm.
because just relying on referrals is no longer, at least in my estimation, enough.
Mhm.
When you're competing against, like you mentioned, lawyers, either solos, solo practitioners, or boutique firms,
Mhm.
or the mega firms that are dialed into social media. It's just not enough to simply rely on referrals. Referrals are important, but they'll be there, so to speak. The social media component has to be part of it because otherwise, you're just not using as much ammunition as you can to try and obtain new clients.
Mhm. And for any attorneys that are listening that they're like, gosh, I'd love to start my own firm. Maybe they're an associate, or they're a few years in and they're like, I know I can do this better on my own and I want to start my own firm. What advice would you give to them?
Um, think it through. Like I mentioned earlier, for me, it took me a while, about a year, to kind of sort it out. But that was also in part because I needed to, when you're letting go of a bunch of institutional clients and then signing up contingency cases, there's a runway that has to exist there,
Mhm.
for all the basics, if you will. So I would say that'd be part of it, is one, study your own financial situation and figure out, what sort of runway you need would be kind of number one, and that's just me as a planner.
Mhm.
um, and number two, it would be to just go for it. But understand that it's going to be a tough stretch at the beginning, but after a while, things get a lot easier. But if you are thinking about it, plan it as best you can to your needs, and then just go for it.
Mhm. Yeah, I always say that's always the best way to approach anything. At some point, you can plan all you want, but you got to jump off the cliff and
Yeah.
fly. And
Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of the younger attorneys that might be kind of working to define what their niche is, maybe they're kind of just trying to figure out, hey, do I want to do business, or do I want to specialize in estate planning or personal injury?
Mhm.
Um, and they really need to build a media presence. And I know that's how you and I initially met as well. You're always out there looking for media coverage, but what are some of the more common mistakes that you see those attorneys making? When they're trying to go out there, not just developing their niche, but also getting that media exposure, because there's got to be a good balance there. What are the biggest mistakes you see, and what actionable advice would you give them to kind of overcome that?
Sure. When it comes to, for example, like videos, what I've seen where I've had the most success is, and now I've kind of figured it out, if you will, just by watching other people and learning from other people, is when you're speaking to the camera, don't speak to an audience, speak to one person,
Mhm.
because that's really who you're talking to. Because when people look at their phones and they're scrolling through Instagram or whatever, it's not 1,000 people all on one screen, right?
Mhm.
That's an audience. It's just literally one person who's looking at the phone at a time. The other one I would say is this is just kind of I think of a kind of a hustle mentality, is no opportunity is too small. And every opportunity that you get, like treasure it. Any small lead you get from whomever it is, even if it doesn't seem related to your practice area, but you can connect it to and bring value to that, whether it's podcast appearance or it's a newspaper clip or whatever it is, do it. It took me probably 2 years, maybe 2.5 years or so before I got something like where I was able to make an appearance on like as a commentator on the Daily Mail, right? And these different publications, it takes time, and I
Mhm.
think a lot of folks want to purchase a lot of these services that will get you on Fox News and these different banners that they really aren't. And it's fine. I'm not saying it's bad. I understand the appeal, but for me, I much more value a legitimate appearance on like for example on your podcast or anyone that is willing to have a conversation than anything else.
Mhm.
So I would say um, keep pushing and keep putting yourself out there on these different platforms that are looking for folks to chat with, and keep going until you get something.
And I love a couple of things that you shared. So number one, I think that's wonderful that you're doing that. And you're right, it takes time to build up. I wrote a podcast, or excuse me, an article that I got from a podcast um, person who had me on their show. I wrote a podcast blog thing out of it, just like this is what came from one podcast interview where I was interviewed on a show. And the gentleman was local. He was in Tampa, and he said, I would love for you to come over and talk to our EO chapter. I'm on the committee. I think you'd be a great speaker. I'm like, okay. So I booked a speaking engagement out of that. I wasn't paid for it, but the exposure I got two paid clients out of it. And then I got two more podcast interviews from that. And it all came from a podcast interview. And it was a kind of a small niche podcast, something like what I do.
Sure.
But it really, I think that's the thing. It always just opens up doors. It's just a different form of networking. And
Yeah.
I am glad that you touched on, I was actually talking to a colleague about that. They were talking about just kind of like what you were saying. We can get you on Fox News. We can get you, and it's $97. And I'm like, who would, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me,
Right.
being in the media for as long as I've been in it. And, she was talking about it. She said, these are all over the place. And I said, yeah, I know. And I think it is better. And I will tell you, like, I've had plenty of PR firms who've reached out to me to submit guests, and I've gotten to the point I don't even work with them anymore because it doesn't go anywhere. They complicate the process. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they don't understand what they're supposed to do. So it's just as easy to do it on your own. So I love that you shared that. Now, the flip side of this, because we have a lot of people who listen to the podcast, the bulk of the audience is attorneys, but we do have some people who listen in who are non-attorneys. And I just want to kind of talk with you about this a little bit because you are specializing in personal injury. Um, there's got to be like some things that when people are coming to you and they're potentially going to be a client and you're like, oh gosh, you shouldn't have waited this long, or like what are some common things that people should not be doing if they've just been in an accident or they've been hurt at work, that you're like, hey, here are some things I would advise you, if you've been hurt.
Sure. I think the number one is, if you need medical attention, get it.
Mhm.
A lot of us, and I'm guilty of this too sometimes, where and I say this as kind of a loose example, but you'll stub your toe, you'll do something kind of silly, and you won't think about it too much, and you'll just kind of keep going about your day Then nighttime comes and it's worse, and you're like, I should have taken some ibuprofen and whatever. And I'm using very benign examples. But for folks who've been in, have had an acute injury, a lot of times they'll, maybe they'll report it, or they'll go to a lawyer, or they won't, or they'll wait, and they may see a doctor, they may not. Things get worse, and then they'll go to the lawyer because things have gotten so much worse. And then they'll make appointments with doctors. They'll make most of them as best as they can because they have to pick up, their child from swimming, or they have to work a second shift, or life, right? So that part I understand, but I always caution people when any of these types of when I see any of these little, I wouldn't call them red flags, but like orange flags, I explain to them, listen, because I've done this for so many years on the other side. The insurance company is thrilled when you're not getting medical attention because they're going to take that as a sign as well. You're not that hurt. It's not that bad. Even though you missed an appointment because you had to take your dog to the vet or what have you. So while it is an incredible burden to have to deal with doctor's appointments and these different things, especially when it was someone else's fault, you have to push through and go to these appointments and seek help as quickly as you can and as often as you can. Because at the end of the day, once that case resolves or a jury comes back with a verdict, that's it. There's nothing else you're going to be able to do to get any sort of compensation for what happened.
Mhm.
So I would say that's kind of the biggest one that I see either at the beginning of a case, in the middle of a case, or if someone has let go of their attorney and come to our office, that's one of the common threads I see.
Mhm. That people just, and too, I think they wait too long to get help, not just medically, but on the legal side too.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think too, there's so much reform, tort reform. I think not just here in Florida, but I've seen it in other states
Mhm.
where I've done continuing legal ed, that there's just changes about because of this. And yeah, you're right. You have to, even if you don't think it's going to turn into anything, go to the doctor, you
Yeah,
know, be safe.
100%.
Now, obviously, since the show's called Chromatic Counsel, I always love to ask all of my guests this question. Do you have any particular go-to colors or go-to wardrobe pieces that you're like, hey, I have to go to court today. This is kind of like a lucky suit or a lucky color. Or do you do any strategic planning with what you're going to wear if and when you have to go to court?
Sure. And it's a great question. And it's one that I've never been asked. So I'll answer it this way. When I was a younger lawyer, I liked putting on like a really cool tie or kind of like a nice pattern, and it all matched and it looked great and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But it was a bit distracting, I found. Not that anyone was commenting on it in open court, but when I would look at the other lawyers who had been there, the more grizzled veterans, if you will, men or women, they typically had on, your expected grays and slate grays and maybe some browns or blues, of course.
Mhm.
So I've tried to modify that into having, a bit of my own style to some degree, but um, I never want to be any sort of a visual distraction. Uh, to the judge and let alone to the jury. So blues, grays. I wish I could give you a more interesting answer, to be frank, but I try and have some style elements if I can.
Mhm.
But I'll always err on the side of okay, blue suit, white shirt, modest tie.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't have to be anything exciting. I know there was the other day on LinkedIn, one of the attorneys, not here in Florida, but they just settled a $5 million, they got a $5 million verdict. And I remember I commented on it because they had a picture of the attorneys the day, they had just left court. And one of them had, just like you said, the blue and the white. And the other attorney had on, it was interesting. It was blue and brown, like a checkered, like light checkered suit. And I said, gosh, those are great colors to wear because, again, blue, it's trust building, and
Yeah.
brown is our familiarity color. It's almost like saying, hey, I'm just like you. I could be your neighbor. I could be your friend. And, I'm sure I know they did a great job, but I had to comment on those colors. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Those are some great go-to colors. And just in closing, I'd love to ask you, is there anything you want to share with the listening audience? Anything you have coming up with your firm? If there's any hiring that you're doing, anything at all that you'd like to share?
No, we're continuously growing. We're about to launch a new kind of social media initiative that'll be on our primarily on our Instagram page, which is at Galimidi_law. I look forward to watching this on YouTube, and I've been really enjoyed the experience.
Awesome. Well, I am so glad that you were able to join me today. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for your time today. And I also want to let everyone know if you are listening and you'd like to get in touch with him, there is a link in the show notes below. Click on that to go directly to their site. And if you liked the interview, I hope you will hit the like button, hit the subscribe button so you are notified of any new episodes we have coming available. And if you know of an attorney that could use a little color or interesting facts in their life, I hope that you will share this interview in the channel with other attorneys. And that is a wrap for this episode. And I hope you can join us next time. And as always, I am wishing you continued success.